The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
There's a movie that I've been wanting to see called Inside Out. I don't know, has anyone seen it? Is it as awesome as it looks in the trailer? If you're not familiar with it, it's a movie about the different voices in our head, about the different emotions we have and how they speak up. As someone said, we're actually run by committee. And I was reading about the making of the movie, and there was a lot of discussion around how to present these different voices. And they realized that they had too many emotions, and they had to strip them down. So they gave the pink slip to pride, hope, gloom, and despair. And they had a big discussion about ennui, and they threw ennui out also. So what they stuck with was joy, anger, sadness, disgust, and fear. But the director, Pete Docter is his name, he said his biggest regret was tossing out Schadenfreude. I just love saying Schadenfreude. It really rolls off the tongue. If you're not familiar with Schadenfreude, it's the emotion that marks taking pleasure in someone else's misery. And I saw this little clip that they had, this little voice that said, "Your cries of pain amuse me." I had a friend visiting this weekend, and he was telling me about the first meditation retreat he went on, where he had to be in silence. And he was just watching his mind as he was, walking around, and he was appalled. He'd look at somebody and think like, "Oh my God, get some new shoes." The next person, you'd go like, "Really? Those pants?" Next person, a nice haircut. And he became appalled at what his mind does, how judgmental the mind can be. And the negative judging voice goes on all the time. And he wasn't aware of it, but he became aware of it. And the more we practice, the more we notice that there's one of these voices inside that is constantly judging and comparing. So we've been exploring over the last couple of weeks some of the practices that are designed to cultivate the different qualities of the heart. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the opposite of Schadenfreude, which is cultivating joy. Cultivating, in particular, sympathetic joy. That's joy not only for yourself, but your capacity to be joyful for others. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the heart practices themselves and how transformational they can be for you. About the opposite of joy and how to work with it when it shows up. Not just Schadenfreude, but envy and jealousy. About the practice itself of how to cultivate joy for yourself and for others. And then a little bit how there's no I in joy. How joy is actually a non-dual state, and quite an exalted state of consciousness when we can experience it. So you may know the book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, by Steven Pinker, which is a study of how actual violence has declined over the centuries. And what he explained was what you have to do is count the number of wars, count the number of people killed in war, plot the trend over time, and that's how you get a picture of whether the world has become more or less violent. It is the only way to really get a clear picture of that. And his study has shown that there is a marked decrease in violence. He says that maybe due to the rise of more nation states, more of a growing appreciation of life, and also the increased global interdependence. So there are fewer wars because we're more interconnected. And it's interesting because he makes a distinction between the headlines and what he calls the trend lines. The trend lines point toward less violence, but the headlines are more and more and more about violence. And yet this violence is around us all the time. And there is some evidence that's saying that in the last number of years there is an uptick in violence. And a lot of it is due to access to wealth. In the wealthy countries, there's less violence. In the poorer countries, where there are fewer resources, there's, of course, more violence. So whenever there's a scarcity of resources, we struggle, we get tight, and we get small, and we act out of that consciousness. So the question becomes, how do we bust out of that small-mindedness? Because we all experience lack of resources, a sense of not enough. We all experience at different times a sense of the other, and I better get mine or someone else is going to take it. How do we shift that? When we go back to the early days of the Buddha, or when the Buddha had his awakening, he had some very profound insights and teachings about the nature of consciousness and about the nature of the heart. His realization of generosity, the practice of generosity, is an extraordinary experience, because when you are generous with another, you lose yourself in that giving. There is an interconnectedness, an inner being that you reinforce through generosity. And he really taught about the different qualities of love. There is an aspect of love which is all about kindness for yourself and for others. Your capacity for compassion, to feel what's truly going on in yourself and in another. Your capacity for joy, to take joy at the pleasure of another. And your capacity for equanimity, a capacity for steadiness in the midst of all kinds of change. And what was so radical about his teaching is that he taught about love and he killed religion. What he was basically saying is, you don't need a god, you don't need goddesses, you don't need rituals, you don't need bells and smells to connect with love. That love is part of your inherent nature. It's accessible regardless of what the externals may be. That was a radical departure, and it remains so today. Can you disconnect the need for a belief in a path, in a tradition, in a God, etc., to experience the raw consciousness of presence, the raw consciousness of the knowledge of our interconnectedness? So these states, these natural, innate states that are accessible to you outside of any particular form or format, actually are exalted states, and they're actually referred to as the Brahma Viharas. The word Brahma is really, it's a God-like state. The word Brahma is one of the aspects of God. The word Vihara is like a dwelling or an abode. So when you can cultivate a sense of open-heartedness, of kindness, compassion, of joy, you are establishing yourself in these Brahma Viharas. And the best description I love about these states is they're described as the immeasurable states. That when you're truly feeling kindness, compassion, joy, or equanimity, they're limitless. You cannot find an edge to that experience. So I haven't talked too much about the Pali names, but the word for kindness is metta, which is the root word of mita, which means friendliness, the capacity to befriend yourself, to befriend others. Karuna is the word for compassion. And mudita, which we'll talk about tonight, is your capacity for joy. And upekkha is the quality of equanimity, which we'll talk about next week. So, while we're aware of these wonderful, beautiful states, we're also aware of the opposite, of what it's like to be caught in jealousy and in envy. And while I always say that joy is completely dependent of externals, I decided to test that theory today by going to the Apple Store. And I found that it's not true. I actually got a new Apple product today, and I watched my own joy and the fleetingness of that joy, but I was also aware there were some other people around the table as I was setting it up. And some of the people were really happy for me, and some of them weren't. I could feel some of them were in sort of like a coveting, wanting state of consciousness. I could feel it, you know. That was an interesting experiment. There's one story I believe I've told, but it speaks a lot to separating joy from the externals. It's the story of two monks who were living in an ashram. And one of them was very adept at, he knew scripture really, really well, you know, he knew all the chants really well, you know, he was kind of a seasoned monk. And the other monk was pretty naive, you know, stumbling a lot, but very sincere and very open-hearted. And there was a great rishi, a great seer, who, you know, every 15 years would just travel through the ashrams, and he could look deeply in your eyes and just sort of read your being and tell you when you would be fully liberated, how many lifetimes it would take. And so the first monk, the adept monk, came in to see the rishi. He sat down. And the rishi looked deeply in his eyes, checked his pulses, and he said, 6 more lifetimes. And this monk said, "Are you kidding me? After all I've done, after how I perfected my knowledge of the sutras, all my chanting, you're telling me I've got 6 more years?" And he just stormed off. The younger monk came in, who obviously had lots of reason to be jealous of the older monk, you know, who was so skillful. He came in, he sat down, and this rishi looked in his eyes and read his pulses. And he said, 27 more lifetimes. And the young monk said, "That's all? Are you kidding me? I can't believe how blessed I am." And he was so ecstatic. He was dancing around the room, and he became instantly enlightened. So, the practice of joy is learning how to unhook from the externals. And yet we easily get caught in jealousy and envy. And jealousy and envy is a kind of a rotten feeling. As someone said, jealousy and envy is counting someone else's blessings for them. So the question then becomes, what do you do when you find yourself caught in jealousy and envy? When you find yourself caught in schadenfreude, of wishing another person ill in order to feel better? In the realms of mindfulness or consciousness, it's helpful to remember that all of our suffering is tied into one of 3 particular poisons, if you will. And they are greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed is the intense desire for what you don't have. Aversion is a deep hatred for what you do have. And delusion is believing something's true that's not true, or believing something isn't true that actually is true. So with the recognition of jealousy or envy, it's very important to remember that this is a sign to turn awareness inside. That this is an invitation to look deeper into your own experience. We often talk of the acronym of RAIN in this practice, to recognize what's here, or to realize what's here, and to ask ourselves if we can allow or accept what's here. And then the I is to investigate, to be intimate with that experience. And oftentimes at the root of envy or jealousy is some sense of not enough. There's some sense of self-doubt, some crippling sense of self-doubt. And then to bring kindness, to bring attention to that, can be a very powerful practice. So I thought we might just do maybe a little 3-minute reflection, if you like, just to see if there's anything in the files here we might want to take a look at. So you might close your eyes. And if you like, you can deepen your breath. And you might just bring into mind as you explore your relationships, is there anyone that you feel some jealousy toward, some envy for what they have that you don't have? We'll just take a few moments to kind of reflect and go through the files. And if you can't think of someone, you can just make it up just for the practice. And you might take a moment and just recognize this quality of jealousy or envy. If it's here for you, it may not be. And just sense if you can make room for it, if you can kind of allow it or accept it for these next few minutes. And then sense if you can locate what that feels like on the inside. What does jealousy, envy feel like? And if you can, you might say hello to that. Just let that know that you see it. Is there a sense of what this feeling needs in order to feel more whole? Or how it wants you to be with it right now? Is there a sense of what you're believing about yourself in this situation? What would you say is the core belief? And you might ask who you are without that belief. And you might just sense if you were to hold this in some form of kindness or compassion, how does it move or shift or change? And can you sense one of these qualities of greed or hatred or delusion? And just to say hello to this. You might deepen the breath and let your eyes open. I find it can be so helpful just to name the experience of jealousy or envy. Sometimes just naming it gives it a little bit more room. And it can be helpful to notice how the very root of our suffering always has some form of attachment. There's something holding on at the very root of that. And to recognize that whatever you're holding on to, you have the capacity to let go. And the avenue to that letting go usually has to do with some form of kindness or compassion. Just to hold that with some form of empathy can be a way to soften that tight grip. So when we're caught in these states of jealousy and envy, we tighten, we get smaller, and we begin this vicious cycle, kind of spiraling down into becoming more and more of a tight knot. And the question then becomes, well then how do we shift that? How do we cultivate sympathetic joy? And just as in anything, it's always helpful to start where it's easiest. I think I shared before in a retreat, we were talking about the practice of metta, of kindness, where you start with someone that's really, really easy. I oftentimes suggest you start with a pet, and that's where the juices are always flowing. And there was one retreat where there was an older gentleman who asked for a special meeting because there was no one in his life that he felt he had any connection to kindness. And as he met with one of the teachers, they kind of went through all of his relationships. He was estranged from his wife and estranged from his kids, and horrible business dealings. And after about a 45-minute talk, where they got to was that in his neighborhood, when he was a kid, there was a dog in the neighborhood he kind of liked. That's where he started. That's where the little seedling began, for him to begin to sense what it was like to generously open and extend his heart. So one of the wonderful places to begin with tuning into sympathetic joy is with kids. I don't have kids. One of the great benefits of having lived a renunciate life and not having kids is being able to go to the Apple store, because I don't have to share my toys with anyone. But I do have a bunch of nieces and nephews. And I know from those who do have children, that when you see your children's success, when you see them be successful at something, there is this natural glowing of the heart, a natural, just a resonant joy at their joy, at their accomplishment. And so that can be a very sweet way to begin. And so when I think of my nieces and my nephews and their successes in school and things they've accomplished, I just have a natural, very organic sense of expansion, of joy at their joy. And then we can explore what it's like to open our capacity to feel joy for other people and their success in their life. And we can begin to expand the circles from there. So why don't we try this as a little short meditation. You might bring into mind someone in your life that you just naturally feel supportive toward. Someone whose success naturally resonates for you. And in your own way, you might just think of them and just bring them into your heart, into your consciousness. You might visualize them if you like. And in your own way, wish them deeply well. Wish for them to be successful and happy. And sense if you can find a resonance inside that can allow their success to feel like your success, to allow their happiness to feel like your happiness. And over the next few minutes, you might add more people who are naturally fall into your consciousness. And imagine their success and their happiness as a resonant feeling of your own success and your own happiness. And over the next minute or so, you might include others that might come into your consciousness. May you be happy, be successful. May you feel joy. And imagine their joy as your joy. And you might sense, just in these final moments, can you just sense the experience of joy and the vibration of joy without any externals? And just sense how big can that feeling get? Can you just sense the immeasurable quality of joy? The aliveness of here and now. And you might deepen the breath. If you like, you can let the eyes open, or feel free to remain with them closed. Quite often when we turn our attention toward the heart, toward these immeasurable states, we encounter our stories, our resistance, which is a natural part of the process. When you focus on joy, you begin to come in contact with what's not joyful. Many, many years ago, I created a program with someone called The Art of Joyful Living. And we had this incredible design. It's going to be writing and music and dance and yoga and meditation and all these just expressions of being and creativity. We had like 60 people come for a week-long retreat. And to my shock, they were the saddest people I'd ever seen. And it just hit me. It was so naive that, of course, those wanting joy would be those who had no access to it whatsoever. And so it's important to remember that to seek these states, these immeasurable states, requires that we come in contact with what is not joyful or kind or happy. And yet there's something about persistence that can be quite powerful. When we sense joy unto itself, as I like to say, there's no I in joy. The experience actually takes you to the possibility of a very profound characteristic of reality. The first characteristic of reality being impermanence. Everything born out of causes and conditions changes. The second characteristic of reality has to do with the suffering and the stress that comes in trying to control change. Anything you try to control will result in some form of stress or unsatisfactoriness. What you can allow to be can result in a sense of joy and happiness and expansiveness. And the third characteristic of reality is this whole beautiful teaching about the I, about who you are. There's an aspect of who you are which is born out of causes and conditions. Your body, your character structure, your beliefs, and all those are subject to change. But there's something about you that is beyond change as well. And when we explore these heart practices, when we can touch into a feeling of joy, there is no I, there is no mind, there is just a sense of resonant being. A very, very delicate state that we all know, we've all touched at some point, but can be quite ephemeral. So joy is not just about finding happiness through external things. It's there, but that's all subject to change. And Tara was telling me about the story of someone on retreat at the end of a week-long retreat. And for this person, it was an absolute roller coaster. Incredible highs and unbelievable lows. And at the end of the retreat, he spoke of this incredible joy he had. And she said, after all the highs and all the lows, tell me about this joy. He said, the joy is in being real. Joy is about presence. In those moments when we're truly present, there can be an experience where nothing is lacking. There's nothing in excess. You're not bound by any externals. There's just a profound quality of well-being. And this huge thank you to the universe. There's a beautiful teaching, and I thought we might close with this as a meditation of how we can access joy, which is utterly independent of our externals. But we can also touch joy through each of the senses. There are times when I'm wandering the woods and I'm with someone who really knows the natural world much better than me. And we'll see a bird flit by. To me, it's just a bi-winged monobeak bird. And they'll be able to say exactly what it is, where it came from and where it's going, and the colors and the plumage, and there's such joy they have in the visuals. There's something so exciting about that. Or someone who can hear a bird song and tell me what that bird is. There's such joy that they get through the sound. Or to be with a musician who takes such joy in sound vibration. The joy you can experience through the sense door of smell, and through the sense door of taste, and through touch. All those are beautiful, beautiful doorways to increase your capacity for joy. So why don't we close with a short reflection on the senses. If you like, you can again close your eyes. And you just might reflect in these moments of this sense door of sight. Just maybe something that you have seen in recent days that just filled you with a sense of wonder. The sense door of sound, natural sounds or the sounds of music that just resonates and vibrates with joy for you. And the sense door of smell, of taste and touch. And this quality of joy is available to us in every moment through the present moment. And while it is available, it is not so easily accessible. And you might reflect on this quote from André Gide. Know that joy is rarer, more difficult, and more beautiful than sadness. Once you make this all-important discovery, you must embrace joy as a moral obligation. In these final moments, just sense these sense doors right now, just as they are. Is it possible to find a sense of peace, satisfaction, and joy in these breaths? And then deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. I'll close with a short quote, which I've adapted just slightly. Some Zen thing from somewhere. Drink tea and nourish life. With the first sip, joy. With the second, satisfaction. With the third, peace. With the fourth, a cookie. Which are waiting for you out in the lobby. Before we go, just a quick announcement. We have one of our board members from IMCW,